Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Poverty Alliance webinar. Could I ask you, just for reasons of bandwidth, and because we've got so many people joining us this morning, if you could keep your cameras off for the moment, that would be really helpful. If I could have my colleagues that are on the call to maybe just remind people of that in the chat once in a while. So my name's Peter Kelly. I'm Director of the Poverty Alliance, and as I said, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this webinar this morning on the Best Start Bright Futures Child Poverty Delivery Plan. This is a webinar that's part of the Poverty Alliance Get Heard Scotland programme of work. Before we start the webinar, a little bit of housekeeping. So if you haven't noticed already, the webinar has been recorded. We will edit it down afterwards and post it on our website so that if you can't stay for the whole session today, you'll be able to catch up with it. Just to remind you to please keep your cameras off, just for reasons of bandwidth and so that everyone can see the speakers when they're on screen. At the Q&A session, we'll have a Q&A after our initial panel this morning. So if you want to ask a question in the Q&A, could you raise your hand? And I know the hand raise function foxes a lot of people on Zoom. So if you can't raise your hand, then drop a question into the chat and we'll pick it up there. And if we do come to you for your question, we'll ask you to put your camera on then and ask your question in person. So that's the housekeeping over and done with. If we think about the Child Poverty Delivery Plan was launched just 2 months ago, just at the end of March, and a lot has happened since then. Over that time, we've had emergency responses put in place from the UK government to try and help address the cost of living crisis. And we've seen probably a bigger focus on poverty and inequality and financial well-being.
Thanks so much.
Sorry, if I could ask everyone just to keep their microphones off and their cameras off, that would be great. Thanks very much. Yeah, so we've seen a real high public level of interest in issues around poverty and inequality over the last couple of months. But the actions contained in this report are really designed to help bring about the changes we need to drive poverty down over the longer term, to drive child poverty down over the longer term, and to help us reach the interim child poverty targets coming up in 2024, and then over the longer term to the child poverty targets in 2030. So it's not just about dealing with the cost of living crisis, but making more permanent changes to how we address poverty in Scotland. In this webinar, we're going to explore what Best Start Bright Futures means practically for delivering change in Scotland, and how we can ensure that the commitments that have been made are implemented. And I think that's absolutely key. We need to see what's been committed to in Best Start Bright Futures actually delivered. One of our problems with previous approaches and strategies to address poverty is the lack of focus on implementation. I think we all understand that that's one of the things we need to get right this time round. So today we've got a really great selection of speakers, both in our opening session this morning and in our workshop sessions later on. We're going to start with Julie Humphreys, Deputy Director in the Scottish Government, who's going to outline some of the key commitments in the plan, and then we'll hear from a panel of speakers. And as I say, real focus throughout our discussions in the panel and in the workshops later on this morning is about implementation. So really thinking about how can we all, whether we're working in grassroots community organisations, voluntary organisations, or in local authorities and health boards, or even in Scottish Government, how do we all work together to ensure that we really deliver on those commitments and drive down child poverty in Scotland? So I'm really delighted that Julie Humphreys, Deputy Director in the Tackling Child Poverty and Financial Wellbeing within Scottish Government, is joining us this morning to give us an overview of the Child Poverty Delivery Plan. There is an awful lot in this plan. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend having a look at it and really getting familiar with some of the commitments that are in there. Julie is going to attempt to cover as much of that child poverty delivery plan in the next 15 minutes. And then after Julie, we'll go straight into our 3 panelists and then have time for Q&A to Julie and the rest of the panelists after that. So with no further ado, I will stop spotlighting myself if I can, and I'll spotlight Julie. Julie, so it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. And I hope everyone can hear me. I am using my children's computer, so it could go disastrously wrong. Let's hope it doesn't. I'm just going to share my screen and put it onto slideshow. So good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak this morning. So as Peter said, I'm Julie Humphreys. I'm one of the Deputy Directors at the Scottish Government, and I look after tackling child poverty and financial well-being. So 2 big themes around child poverty and the cost of living there. And I'm really delighted to be speaking about Best Start Bright Futures this morning, our new Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan. And as Peter said, this is not the end. This is actually the beginning of our delivery journey together, and we're going to need all the help we can to make the progress that we need to make. So I'm going to quickly run through the kind of background to the plan, the approach that we took, the key actions, the look at the impact, and our real focus on implementation and delivery. Okay, so Best Start Bright Futures sets out how we will work together to deliver Scotland's national mission to tackle child poverty. And as you will all know, the Child Poverty Act Scotland 2017 set in place robust requirements for action, monitoring and reporting at both a national and a local level. And it includes 4 ambitious income-based targets, which must be met by 2030, with interim targets to be met by 2023. And I've included those targets, so we have those at the front and centre of our mind. And you'll see they're ambitious, and they are going to take all of Scotland to deliver. And the Act itself sets out a requirement that Scottish ministers have to prepare delivery plans over the lifetime of the Act, which runs to 2030. And we've got the first one, which was Every Child, Every Chance, which was published in 2018. And now the second one, which is here in front of me, Best Start Bright Futures. And that covers the period from 2022 to 2026. And in this period, we must cover and meet the interim targets. And it builds on the evidence we've generated from Every Child, Every Chance, the lessons from COVID-19, and huge consultation with our partners across Scotland, including families and parents who have experience of living in low-income households. And our consultation took place in autumn 2021 and early 2022. And we heard from a huge number of groups from the Poverty and Inequality Commission, local government colleagues, COSLA, the Scottish Parliament, national and local third sector organisations, businesses, health boards, parents and children. And we obviously drew on the work which Poverty Alliance have led around Get Heard Scotland. And the key messages that we heard included the need for action at greater pace and scale, a national vision with local flexibility to respond to specific needs and circumstances, a greater coherence to join up across bits of the system, and action to get more cash directly to those who need it most. You can see I'm struggling slightly with my children's very old computer, so I hope I've moved on to the next screen. But Best Start Bright Futures builds on the evidence that we established in Every Child, Every Chance, and it retains the key elements of our approach. And we have 3 drivers of child poverty reduction, which you will all be well aware of. Those are income from employment, cost of living, which is particularly pertinent at the moment, and income from social security and benefits in kind. And you'll see on the screen the kind of the factors that contribute to each of those. And we've also got 6 priority family groups that we look to target through the plan. And those are lone parents, those with a disabled member of the household, those larger families with 3+ children, those from minority ethnic backgrounds, those who have their youngest child under 1, and those mothers that are under 25. And the plan is structured around the interdependencies between the policies and the needs for all of it to wrap around each family and household to provide them with the opportunities that they need. So it sets out our offer to families. And that offer to families is in 3 parts. The first of which is providing opportunities and integrated support for parents to enter, sustain, and progress in work. This is not a short-term thing, this is for the long term, and we need to make sure that this is sustainable. Secondly, maximising the support available for families to live dignified lives and meet their basic needs. And then finally, supporting the next generation to thrive with the opportunities that they need. And underpinning this is the real recognition that we need to deliver differently. What we've done in the past has made progress, but not quickly enough. And we need to work together with partners to provide a more holistic service offering for parents and families. So more person-centred support. And that's really easy to say, but really hard to deliver. So I'll go through the 3 components in turn. So the first one around providing opportunities and integrated support to parents that they need to enter, sustain, and progress in work. And the ambition set out in the plan, and it is ambitious, is to support 12,000 parents to enter sustainable employment as a result of the actions taken over the lifetime of the plan, and to increase the earnings of a further 3,000 parents. This will require all parts of the system, and Scotland's offer to parents will be making it through a number of kind of different avenues. And it also feeds into a number of other government strategies, the kind of national economic transformation, the new employability offer, as well as the wider support that we need to provide to parents around transport, childcare, and the right support at the right time. So some of the key actions are up on screen. You'll see up to £81 million in 22-23, which will support parents into employment, including access to childcare and transport, building on the No One Left Behind approach. A £2 million challenge fund to test out new approaches. And that's one of the key things from the new plan, is that we are testing and finding out what works and then going to scale it up. So up to £15 million for a parental transition fund to tackle financial barriers to those entering the labour market. We're looking at funding offers of early learning and childcare and building a system that allows school childcare to wrap around. We are including work on improving the availability and affordability of public transport, and there will be a fair fares review that will be published later in the year that will be central to that. We're looking at extending Connecting Scotland with a focus on the priority families, and working with employers to remove barriers, and including ensuring that we have fair work principles. Then the next component is maximising the support available for families to lead dignified lives and meet their basic needs. And the plan sets out our commitments to delivering public services in a holistic way that enables choice and support for families to flourish at the right time for them, not forcing them into a way or a system that doesn't react to their household circumstances at that time. And we recognise that employment is not a realistic outcome for all families at all of the time, whether it's due to the age of the children, disability or caring responsibilities, or the current circumstances that they find themselves in. And the plan itself sets out some wider commitments to reduce household costs, increase incomes from social security, and provide the right support at the right time for every family. And I've listed some key actions included here around the 500 million for the whole wellbeing family fund. We obviously doubled Scottish Child payments at the beginning of April, and we will increase that payment to £25 per week per child by the end of 2022. We're increasing the value of the 8 Scottish social security benefits by 6%. We're working with local authorities to mitigate the benefit cap as far as possible. And we will have £10 million to increase access to holistic advice services, including the Family Nurse Partnership. We will continue to invest in affordable housing supply and reduce the costs of families in the private rented sector, and also tackle fuel poverty, which is obviously a huge issue at the moment. And we need to also think about how we break the cycle of homelessness. So finally, and not forgetting that we need to support the next generation to thrive. Whilst the delivery plan does focus on the action and the delivery needed to address the 3 drivers of child poverty, it also recognised that wider action is needed to enhance children's well-beings and outcomes and support them to achieve their potential and avoid becoming the parents in poverty of the future. These actions, whilst unlikely to necessarily move or change the child poverty targets by 2030, are hugely important, and we cannot hit the targets but miss the point. So we really need to make sure that children are not repeating the experience of previous generations and their families. So some of the things we're doing in that preventative spend are around £60 million for new play parks during this Parliament. We're publishing refreshed materials to support practitioners to implement getting it right for every child. There'll be the promise, which will obviously be kind of hugely important to support those in or on the edge of care. The Scottish Attainment Challenge will continue to focus on how it improves educational outcomes for all children and young people. There is access to digital device for every school-aged child by 2026. The School Leavers Toolkit to ensure that young people, when they leave school, have the tools that they need to make positive choices about their future. There's 45 million in 2022-23 for the Young Persons Guarantee. And we're also looking at enhancing the total student support package so it reaches the equivalent of the living wage. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the key things that we're doing in this plan is working together differently to deliver holistic services for parents and families. And we've talked about this for so many years, but now this is the opportunity to kind of think about what is working well, how we learn from it, and how we scale it up. So there's 2 key things that I want to talk about here that will help us deliver the transformational change, and it is transformational change that we need to meet our ambitious targets. And we need to ensure that the system works for people in the way that they need it to work. So the Pathfinders in Dundee and Glasgow will bring together partners to identify and overcome barriers and maximise use of resources to provide tailored support for families. And we're going to use around £5 million from the Tackling Child Poverty Fund in 22-23 to help us do that. And the work in Glasgow and Dundee will support us in learning what works. And we're doing that in partnership with the local council, third sector organisations, importantly, DWP as well, because it's not just for the Scottish Government to solve and work to make sure families are going into employment, it is also the responsibilities of the UK Government. So we need to work across the governments to make sure we're giving people the opportunities to flourish that they need. We've also got the Social Innovation Partnership, which some of you will have heard of before, and we work with the Hunter Foundation and a number of partners across Scotland to deliver that. And for example, in 2022-23, we're working with up to 300 people, and then we're hoping to scale that up to 3,000 by 2026. And some of the projects are looking at more accessible funded childcare, promoting that flexible working that we talk so much about, and the well-being in the workplace. What's been fascinating is hearing the impact that COVID has had on individuals and households and how important well-being has become. And then finally, there is something here that's really important, is how we work with local authorities to enabling different models of support that work for individual families. So the actions that are projected in the plan will look to reduce child poverty to the lowest levels in 30 years. Now, we've talked about cost of living very briefly, and that is going to make things even more challenging. But through the modelling that we did before the plan was published, we have set out that we estimate that that by 2023-24, 17% of children will live in relative poverty and 16% will live in absolute poverty. This is promising, but clearly more work is needed. We continue to face strong headwinds, particularly in relation to absolute poverty as a result of the cost of living crisis. And families will also face real challenges in meeting the cost for essentials such as food and fuel. And you'll have heard the First Minister speak eloquently about how she does not want Scotland to be a place where you have to choose between heating and eating. And a number of our stakeholders, including many of you on this session today, have been clear about the focus that we need to put on implementation to tackle the deep-rooted inequalities for priority families and women in particular. And there remains a bit of a gap to close the 2030 targets, but we need to give it absolutely everything that we've got. And as I said at the beginning, this is not the end, this is the beginning of the implementation and the delivery of the plan. So some of the things that we're doing in government to make this even more effective is this is not a document that we publish and we put on a shelf. It's a document that's living, and we're going to make sure that we are focusing on delivery. So we've made a number of key changes in government to make sure that we can do that. The first of which is a new Child Poverty Programme Board, which includes Scottish Government officials from across the organisation, as well as external members from local government, the third sector, academia, and businesses who will bring their skills, expertise and challenge to the work. That will complement the super work that the Poverty and Inequality Commission already do to support ministers to work out what is going to change the dial. We have a new directorate in Scottish Government. That might feel like an odd thing to say, but it's really important because it's allowed us to focus our work in terms of tackling child poverty. This is not just about what my team does or other teams in the directorate. This is about what the entirety of the Scottish Government does. And the leadership that we're able to use through a new directorate is helping us deliver and really focus on delivery. And in that vein, we have a new group at my level, at Deputy Director level, who are looking at how we deliver, focusing on the real nuts and bolts of delivery to ensure we have improved cross-portfolio working, to manage the risks to delivery and make sure the interdependencies are not lost in all of this. So it would be remiss of me not to mention something that happened last week, and that's the resource spending review. And you'll have read it. There's a lot in it to digest, and you'll see that ministers published an ambitious but realistic public spending framework, which outlines £180 billion that will be invested to deliver priorities for Scotland up to 2026-27. And it's really important to remember that the resource spending review is not a series of budgets, but it outlines how we will focus public finances in the coming years with the following priorities. And it's really important you see the order in which these are presented. Tackling child poverty is the first one. Obviously, we have to do stuff on climate change and strengthening the public sector as Scotland recovers from COVID to grow a fairer, stronger, greener economy. But tackling child poverty is absolutely at the centre of government's priorities, and it will continue over the lifetime of the spending review. So I haven't got a clue how I've done on timing, Peter. I don't know if I'm within my 15 minutes, but you've been so polite that you haven't told me if I'm over. So I just wanted to finish with some thank yous. And these are genuine thank yous, because without the input of so many of you into the plan, we wouldn't have made the progress to get the plan and get such a credible, I think, document. So thank you for the input that has shaped the plan. Thank you for all you're doing to support and challenge us in the Scottish Government to tackle child poverty and to challenge each other as delivery partners to do that in the best way. And thank you for listening. And I really look forward to the rest of discussions today.
Thanks very much, Julie. Yes, I think you're actually right spot on time there. So thanks very much for that. And yeah, I think that you've given us a great deal to think about there. A really excellent overview of what is a comprehensive plan, contains a lot of detail. And again, I would remind you, if you haven't had the chance to look at the plan, then to take some time to have a look at it and see what's in it. But we're going to move on now. Thanks again to Julie for that input, that really stimulating overview of the plan. We're going to move on now to hear some reflections on the plan and what are perhaps some of the challenges that lie ahead for us in terms of really implementing what's been committed to in there. Really delighted that we're going to start with John Dickey. John, as you know, is Director of the Child Poverty Action Group in Scotland, has played a key role over many years in driving forward the anti-poverty agenda in Scotland. So at this new phase of that anti-poverty child poverty agenda in Scotland, really pleased to get John's reflection for us now. So John, let me just make you spotlight you somehow to do that. I'm not sure. Let me just switch mine off. There we are. Thanks, John. Over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Peter, and thanks to Julie for that overview of the delivery plan. So, as a national charity whose entire purpose is to work for an end to child poverty, both here in Scotland and across the UK, there really is much to welcome in the plan. Working with other members of End Child Poverty in Scotland, we at CPAG had called for a plan that, amongst other things, doubled the Scottish Child Payment and committed to the further increases needed to ensure that the 2023-24 child poverty targets are met, continued to have that clear focus on the drivers of child poverty, set out action to mitigate the benefit cap, but also the two-child limit, adopted a no wrong door approach for families seeking financial support. We know from our advice work and our case evidence that too many families fall through the gaps between local, Scottish and UK sources of financial support, and that far more active referrals and link up is needed between agencies. We also called for a plan that scaled up employability support, particularly for mums and for parents affected by disability, that set out how public procurement and public body wage setting would be used to lever improvements in the quality of job opportunities available, particularly in female-dominated sectors such as social care and childcare, was clear on how housing policy would contribute to reducing child poverty, that prioritised investment in childcare and early learning, and that included robust cumulative assessment to show how the interventions described in the plan, when taken together, would ensure that the interim targets are met and that a clear path was being laid toward meeting the 2030 targets. So I think there's no question, and as we've heard from Julie, that there's much in Best Start, Bright Future that reflects and responds to many of these calls. The doubling of the Scottish Child Payment had already been announced, but a further increase to £25 makes even more of a difference to struggling families themselves and to the likelihood of meeting the 2023-24 child poverty target. We really have come a long way since we first called for the use of new Scottish Social Security powers back in 2016 to directly tackle child poverty. And the fact, as we heard from Julie, that a potential path to meeting the interim child poverty targets of fewer than 18% of our children living in poverty has been laid, it is a big step forward. Also welcome the recognition that there needs to be a step change in the scale of support to parents to overcome barriers to employment, and a transformation in the kind of labour market that we have. Although I think it's fair to say that there's less detail in the plan on how this will be achieved. And it's that detail that is what we all now need to be engaging with to ensure that the broad commitments set out in the plan are implemented in ways that translate into real change on the ground. So on social security, vital to keep the delivery of the Scottish Child Payment under close review, ensuring that take-up is maximised and that the level of payment is adequate to keep families afloat, to meet the interim target, and to ensure a credible path is being laid to achieving the 2030 target. On the commitment to mitigate the benefit cap, we need to ensure that guidance and resources are put in place to ensure councils use discretionary housing payments to mitigate the benefit cap as fully as possible, but without cutting into the wider role that discretionary housing payments play in supporting families with other gaps between housing costs and income. We would also urge the Scottish Government to now look at the two-child limit and how Scottish powers could be used to mitigate that most unfair of poverty-generating UK welfare reforms. On work, the reference to use of procurement and public sector wage setting as ways to improve the quality of work are very welcome. But it still feels like we need much more detail about how Scottish Government intends to transform the economy and our labour market so that decently paid, family-friendly jobs are accessible to all in time to ensure that the 2030 target is met. And of course, still need to see the detail of how that scaled up employment support package will work in practice so that it has the poverty reducing impact that it needs to. And it'll be vital to listen to parents and those working with the priority family groups that Julie set out to understand what works best to remove the barriers that they face. We also need to engage in the detail of the early learning and childcare commitment to ensure that it delivers the scale, but also the quality of childcare that's needed that will support children's development at the same time as providing the flexibility needed to enable parents to work the hours that they want. On housing, welcome that child poverty is to be explicitly recognised in the government's affordable housing supply and private rented sector reforms. But again, not yet clear what this will mean in practice in detail. And we would argue that we still need to see a definition of affordable housing that takes account of the reality of the scaled back support for housing costs in UK social security. A home can't be judged as affordable if it's still leaving the family living in it in poverty. So there's clearly still much detail to be worked up and much for all of us to engage with and help shape. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today to hear others' views on how we make sure that the national plan translates into real changes for families on the ground. But I wanted to finish with a couple of the points. As Julie actually recognised, as it stands, the Scottish Government's own modelled impact of the delivery plan suggests that the very welcome progress expected as a result of the policy package set out in the plan will stall after 2024-25. So we clearly need to think ahead, and clearly there'll be need for much, much more to ensure that the downward trajectory on child poverty modelled to 23-24 continues beyond 2024, so that 2030 target is hit. And secondly, families will need more support now and in the coming months through the cost of living crisis. Absolutely right that the plan continued to focus on tackling the long-term drivers of child poverty, lack of income from work, lack of income from social security, the costs families face, and that it focused on meeting those child poverty targets. The drivers of child poverty have been exposed even more clearly by the cost of living crisis, but they long predate it. But it's also important we do respond to the immediate cost of living crisis in ways that keep families afloat in the short term and contribute to those longer term ambitions to reduce child poverty. So that means ensuring that additional cost of living support reaches the families that most need it. One immediate way of doing that would be, for example, to double the Scottish Child Payment bridging payments that are being paid for some school-aged children until the Scottish Child Payment is fully rolled out. So doubling those to match the doubling of the Scottish Child Payment. So in conclusion, much to welcome in the plan. I think we are closer to making a substantive impact on child poverty in Scotland than any time in well over a decade. But the reality is that far too many children and families are facing an immediate cost of living crisis that makes targets and trajectories seem a long way off. So there is no room for complacency, but there is a real opportunity now to make sure that the overall ambitions of the plan translate into real change for those families. And I'm looking forward to working both with government, but also with all of you to make sure that we ensure that those ambitions and those actions in the plan really do make a difference and are implemented in such a way that really do make a difference for individual children and families across Scotland in the coming months and years. And at that point, I'll pause. Again, I'm not quite sure if I'm running over time, but hopefully stayed within my 10 minutes, but I'll pause there, Peter.
You're right on time, John. Thanks very much. And again, thanks for real insight into what has been achieved in terms of the campaigns that have been mounted by Child Poverty Action Group and the End Child Poverty Coalition and others, and how that's reflected in the plan, and also some of the challenges that lie ahead of us. Really delighted now to turn to Morag Traynor. Again, Morag will be familiar to many of you taking part in this call today. She's a Professor of Child and Family Inequality at Heriot-Watt University, but today she's speaking to us in her role as Deputy Chair of the Poverty and Inequality Commission itself, one of the bodies that came out of the Child Poverty Act. Really delighted to have Morag with us this morning and to hear her reflections on the plan so far. Over to you now, Morag.
Hi, thanks everyone for having me here this morning, for inviting me. As Peter says, I'm here in my function as the Deputy Chair of the Poverty and Inequality Commission. So what I'm going to do is set out who the Commission are, what our function is, what we welcome about Bright Start's Best Start Bright Futures, and where we think some of the gaps lie and some of the things to focus on for the Scottish Government to focus on in the coming years. So the Poverty and Inequality Commission is set up by the Child Poverty Act, and we have a statutory function, and the government has a responsibility, it has a requirement to consult with the Commission on measures they propose to include in their delivery plans. They have a requirement to have regard to any of our recommendations, and they have to discuss with us changes set out in the plans and what they've done as a result of our recommendations. So our advice is published in full online on the Poverty and Inequality Commission's website, and you will be able to go and see that if you'd like to see what we suggested. In order to inform our advice, we had a number of expert discussions with people in the third sector, with all sorts of think tanks and policy bodies, but most importantly, we have a panel of experts by experience who help us in our work, and we don't just do focus groups with them and get their opinions. They've actually helped us to develop our advice to government. They work very closely with us in a very collaborative and co-produced way. So some of the recommendations that I would present to you now are actually from our experts by experience and not from us per se. So what we welcome in the plan is the greater acknowledgement by the Scottish Government of the need for an increased scale and pace of investment. That's something we emphasise quite strongly. Also, the recognition of the importance of lived experience, that they will be setting up an experience panel to inform their employability activity, which is very welcome. We also welcome the additional investment in employability and to support the priority families to access and progress in work. And we welcome the use of the modelling and the cumulative impact assessment, which is useful in indicating how much we can expect to see child poverty change because of these actions and implementation of these actions and how they will work together. It was interesting to see the Scottish Government, it will come close to, or indeed will meet its interim targets, and there's a lot to welcome in that, as John said. This is the most that's been done in rather a long time, and that's super. And it's important to keep those targets central. However, we've got to remember that these targets can change when reductions in average income right across the UK happen because of something like a pandemic. So, you know, that can have a quirk on relative poverty, where relative poverty can fall, even though people's experiences of poverty are getting deeper and more severe, especially with a cost of living crisis. So we have to be careful to balance the meeting or the near meeting of the relative poverty target with the actual experience of people on the ground. And that's where the absolute poverty measure and the material deprivation aspect of the combined measure comes in. So it's really good that the government keeps a focus on all of those measures. So we welcome the investment in new actions, and I say particularly in relation to the employability support and the focus on the priority groups. What I'd like to emphasise here, though, is that 2/3 of lone parents, for example, are in more than one priority group. So at the moment, the way the priority groups were set out in that sort of grid style pattern, it's too easy to think that people are in one priority group and we can fix a group or fix the employment opportunities for a group. But actually 2/3 of lone parents are in more than one priority group. So we need to be looking at the experiences across that. For example, 40% of children living in poverty have a disabled family member. More than half of children living in poverty where their mother is young also are living in a lone parent family. So we have to look at these cross sections of the intersectionality of the priority groups as well. I welcome Julie's approach to focus on individual needs. I can understand the importance of doing that, but that must not come at the expense of looking at the structural issues we face in Scottish society that makes it difficult for some priority groups to access and sustain employment, whether that's because of ethnicity and race, lone parent status and caring status, or disability in the family. Our experts by experience panel wanted us to emphasise that actually they don't think they necessarily need employability, but rather there are employers that need employability, and that is an understanding of what disabled people need to access and progress in the workplace. So I think as well as the focus on the individual and on the employability deficits that they may have, we also need to, one, take a more asset-based approach and to focus on the employers and the broader structural issues we have in Scottish society. So one of the gaps, therefore, in the report, in the Best Start Bright Futures, would be for us not as much focus as we would have liked on creating good, secure jobs for people. Because if you can get people into jobs, the employability programs gets people into jobs, these have to be good quality, secure jobs, because what you don't want to do, we have 2/3 of children in poverty who have someone in the family who's already working. What we don't want to do is shift it from one type of poverty to in-work poverty and the stresses and strains of insecure, precarious employment and lack of employer understanding that comes when you have situations in the family around care. We don't want that to increase. So there needs to be a focus on what the Scottish Government can do to create and encourage good quality, secure jobs. And we'd like to see more of that. I'm just looking at my notes to see what else I can see. With the modelling that's happening, it's important that isn't a one-off at the start, but that happens throughout this plan. Very happy to hear Julie saying that this plan is a living document. I hope too the analysis is a living document and that we will see updated analysis as it comes through. We need to have some very definitive reasons, very definitive targets, if you like, on what the Scottish Government expects the employability programme to achieve and what its measures of success will be. When will it know to expand on what it's doing? When will it know to maybe shift direction and stop doing something and change direction? We need that flexibility to keep the pace and the scale going. So I can see I'm coming to the end of my 10 minutes. So I'll say the last thing is that we asked that child poverty is kept at the core of all policy making, not just as an idea or as a concept, but as a hard target. We had advised that, for example, in the affordable housing policy, that the impact on child poverty should be core, and that some of these units, affordable housing units, were to be for larger families. And we noticed that the Scottish Government has put a focus or at least an acknowledgement of larger families in affordable housing. However, there's no target. How many children will be impacted? There tends to be a focus on the amount of money given to something, the focus on what parental family that will focus on, but we want to know what impact it will have on child poverty itself, and that is something we need to keep at the core. So some stronger maybe commitments across policy to addressing child poverty, make it integral to policy making. But all in all, a very welcome document, very much a progression on the first delivery plan. It has progressed, it has developed. But with some of these ideas that we've presented from the Commission, we think it could be stronger, and we look forward to working with the Scottish Government over the coming years to strengthen it further. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Morag. Again, really clear, really strong statements coming out about not only what's good in the plan, but also what needs to be improved and what we can focus on in terms of implementation over the coming years. Again, really delighted to have Bruce Adamson here. Bruce, as you'll know, is the Children and Young People's Commissioner in Scotland. And I want to emphasise the consistency of the approach that we've taken here, both in our evidence to Scottish Government, our preparation around the consultation last year. Bruce and Morag and John all spoke in different webinars highlighting some of the priorities that they saw for the next Child Poverty Delivery Plan last year. So it's really delighted to have all three of them, and Bruce included, back to speak to us about what they make of this new Child Poverty Delivery Plan. So now, Bruce, over to you.
Thanks so much, Peter, and thanks everyone for joining us. And Julie, John and Morag, it's always a pleasure to follow the three of you. We're lucky to have such human rights champions here in Scotland. As Children and Young People's Commissioner Scotland, I've got the best job in the world. My job is to promote and safeguard the rights of children and young people. And poverty is a human rights issue. Even before COVID, poverty was the biggest human rights issue facing children. And now with COVID and the cost of living crisis, things are worse. But I'm very pleased to see the plan and some of the really positive things that have already been discussed. It's important that we always see this within the human rights context, and that children have the right to an adequate standard of living, which includes a safe and warm place to live and good nutritious food, but they also have the right to benefit from social security and have families supported. I think as we start to understand the impacts of the pandemic and look forward to the delivery of this plan, it's really important that we recognise that poverty affects every aspect of children's lives, including their ability to learn, their mental and physical health, their development, their ability to socialise and engage in cultural activities, and in future opportunities. One young person recently summarised how living in poverty can feel to them, saying, "When you're poor, you give up on your dreams." And I think that's really hard-hitting and really enforces the fact that we need to make sure that this plan is properly delivered. As others have said, some groups are disproportionately affected by poverty, including disabled children or families with a disabled parent. And I note that it is Carers Week this week. Care experienced young people, Black and minority ethnic children and young people, children of prisoners, single parents, families, larger families. And so we need to make sure that their rights are all respected, protected, and fulfilled. It's good to see that some of these groups have been recognised within the plan, but I do agree with Morag about the importance of recognising the intersectionality of those groups. Children and young people themselves are acutely aware of what poverty means and how it impacts on them and their families. One young person recently told us, "When I think of poverty, I think of inequality. It's not fair and it's not right." And a 12-year-old told us, "It's the most unfair thing that government knows that families are going through hard times, but don't care enough to do anything about it." I think that what we're seeing through this plan is a strong commitment from government to do something about it. And really address some of the concerns. And so several measures within the plan, including the increase to the Scottish Child Payments and the focus on social security powers that are available in Scotland, are incredibly welcome. The expansion of free school meals, really positive steps in the right direction. But as we've heard, the interim targets for 2024 are still looking like they might not be met. And I think that it's really important that this roadmap that we've heard about is absolutely focused on in terms of meeting the standards that we've laid out for Scotland, if we're going to meet the 2030 statutory targets. I'd like to focus on a few things where I think that the plan could be improved, or additional focus that we need to have, and particularly the rights-based focus. And I think that the incorporation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the commitment from the Scottish Government to bring other human rights treaties into our domestic law is absolutely essential. it's very concerning, the lack of urgency and the delays over the last year or so, particularly since the Supreme Court decision on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's absolutely essential that we get these legal frameworks locked into our domestic law, because only through having that accountability, particularly on economic, social and cultural rights, are we going to get the real change that we need. And so again, my big call for Scottish Government is for much more urgency in locking in some of those accountability frameworks. Participation is a really important element. Children and young people need to be part of the design and the solution. And we get a consistent message from children and young people that they don't feel that their voices are properly being heard in discussions around poverty. It was good to see some of the work that went into this plan and involving children and young people. And I highly commend the work of the Poverty and Inequality Commission, experts by experience, and some of the work that we've been doing with them to ensure that young people are involved in not just the solutions, but also the monitoring and reporting against the standards that have been set out. And there's some other good examples, like the Children's Future Food Inquiry and the Young Food Ambassadors, show really how powerful the voices of children and young people with expertise by experience can be. And so participation of children and young people, absolutely essential to all aspects of this plan. It's also a right that they have under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But young people have consistently told us that they feel that we're still fairly tokenistic with involving children and young people. Often they feel that they're being included just as a bit of a tick box exercise. And I think that's really important, that children need to be involved in all aspects of decision making, but also in monitoring and follow up. And so again, one young person said to us, we're often asked for our opinions, but then after that it's silence. We never know how we've been listened to or heard or followed up, or whether it's actually achieved anything. We need to see the impact of what we supposedly did to help. And I think that's really important in terms of how we build in participation. And we aren't protecting children and young people by excluding their voices and experience. Children and young people who are living with the effects of poverty know what's going on. And so excluding their voices is the wrong approach. Social security, I think, has been really well covered by some of the previous speakers. Julie listed the key actions within the delivery plan. And I think that and I strongly endorse what John was saying as well, in terms of there is focus that we need to remain on the reserved powers that the UK government has. And we work closely with the other UK children's commissioners, because there needs to be significant change at the UK level in terms of social security. But obviously today our focus is on the plan within Scotland. So social security is a fundamental right, but it's also a gatekeeper to securing the other rights as well, including an adequate standard of living. And it's important to recognise that the Convention on the Rights of the Child gives a specific right to children to benefit from social security and to have their families supported. So I think this is really important to see the progress that we're making here. I think strongly welcome the increase to £25 and the expansion to cover up to 16-year-olds, that we know that getting that money directly to family on low incomes is an absolutely key driver in reducing child poverty in the longer term. We're not where we need to be. And I think, again, I would strongly endorse the work of the Fraser Ballinger Institute and IPPR and all of the previous speakers who have spoken, and everyone who's working really hard on this, who have called for increase in child payments, significantly higher than it is, and also making sure that we have some way of locking in the payment against the cost of living increases that are happening as well. And so I think it's really positive that we've got really strong public campaigning around this, but more needs to be done on social security, recognizing that some of this is within the gift of the UK government, but it's really important that we focus on the powers that are within Scotland as well. Strongly welcome the work on cost of the school day, and particularly the focus on free school meals. I noted that someone in the chat had mentioned breakfast provision, which is something that we'd be interested in talking about as well, because food insecurity is a huge concern in terms of poverty. And there needs to be some change in relation to the way in which food provision and through free school meals is provided. It's a really important lever. We know this to tackle food poverty and food insecurity. But children and young people still tell us that they have concerns around the awareness of eligibility for free school meals. Still exists some stigma in terms of free school meals. And again, stigma and poverty is something that we're really concerned about. and also the quality and food portion sizes. I spend a lot of time in schools talking to children and young people, and that's something that comes up consistently. So I think some more work needs to be done around ensuring that there's access to signing up and registration for free school meals, and also involving children and young people more in the decisions around what school meals look like. Children have talked about a kind of decrease in quality and being able to source better food outside of the school system. The rights to leisure, play and recreation, again, welcome the commitment within the plan to focus on outdoor play as a really important driver of health. And this reflects the right that children have within the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And we know that play and access to cultural activities is really important for children's development. I'm watching my time, Peter, so I'll finish up fairly quickly. Public transport, another really key one. It was the priority of the Youth Parliament a couple of years ago, welcoming the access to free bus travel for under 22s, although lots of the discussions we're having with children and young people are around the adequacy of access to transport. And so there's been some issues getting the cards. I appreciate that being dealt with, but also free transport's only useful if there are buses that are running to the places that you need to be when you need to be there. And so I think there's more work that needs to be done around the links, particularly in rural communities, between transport and poverty. So I'm going to finish up there because I'm at my 10 minutes, but I want to finish up just very quickly with the voices of children and young people. A few years ago, we asked children to use just 7 words, to give us 7-word stories about why rights were most important to them. And they always stick in my head whenever I have these kinds of conversations, because they said things like, my rights are my armor to me. Rights are help before you even ask. And I think that's a really important one when we think about some of the measures in here. It's in terms of need to be more accessible. One of my favorites is humans have rights, dinosaurs don't, they died, which I think has all sorts of links to climate change and things. Freedom from poverty helps all children flourish. Freedom from poverty helps all children flourish, which I think is a beautiful one. And I'll leave you with a last one, which I think taps into the optimism that some of the others have expressed, and the fact that this is a very welcome plan and we can build upon it. And so the last 7 words go to a young person who said, rights matter, you matter, don't lose hope. Thanks. Thanks
very much, Bruce. Really good to finish on that optimistic note, I think. I'm going to ask all of our speakers, so Julie, John, Morag, to put your cameras back on, and we'll start a discussion. We're running a wee bit behind, so we're probably going to eat into our break at 11:15, but that's okay, I think. I don't want to put any of our speakers on the spot, but I think I have to go back firstly to Julie. I mean, you've heard 3, I think, positive responses to the Child Poverty Delivery Plan, really welcoming the ambition of the plan, the progress that's been made since the first Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, and I think really highlighting where there's a lot to build on. But maybe ask just briefly, Julie, if you would like to reflect on some of the comments that you've heard so far, and John, if you want to join us again as well. Great. Oh yeah.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Peter. And as always, I've focused on the constructive elements of the comments from Bruce, Morag and John, because actually that's what we need to do. It's great to hear that the plan is broadly welcomed and there's great stuff in it. I know that already, but what I also know is there is more to do, and there is more to do around how we deliver, when we do it, and the way in which we do it. And I think I was really struck by some of the reflections around the intersectionality of the priority groups, and it's often really easy to put people into one of those groups, but not recognize that they could be in a number of those groups. And actually the kind of the importance of the relationships amongst those groups is really important. And I think that's something I'm really kind of struck by. Also, I think, and if it didn't come over, the commitment from the Scottish Government is absolutely there to deliver differently. The real challenge that we have is that we cannot do this alone. It's not just for us to do. And I think one of the kind of big challenges for me in reading the comments is that actually I'm not responsible for an awful lot of the policies. Colleagues across the organisation are, and I think, and across Scotland, and I think how do we get that momentum is really important and is one of the key things that we need to do. And I think, you know, I could reflect probably for at least, you know, an hour on the comments that Bruce Morag and John have given, but I just want to kind of finish around inclusion and participation, because I think that's really important. And we talk about, you know, person-centered support, but we can only do that by listening and hearing what people tell us, what children tell us, what parents tell us, and communities and those who support them. And I think there's something really at the heart of this for me around, as I would say to my children, have you got your listening ears on? We've absolutely got our listening ears on in government, but we need to start making sure that is translating into delivery and how we focus on delivery and providing the opportunities for people to flourish rather than telling them how to do it. And I think that's really important for me. I could go on lots of stuff in this, and I'm really glad this has been recorded, because I want to go back and listen again, because actually there's so much in the report and the document itself that we often miss really important elements, and you could focus on any of the policies or the components that colleagues have talked about this morning and talk for a day on them. And I think that's what, you know, is the really important thing for me, is it's not just about what I do, it's about what the entirety of government does, what every cabinet minister is doing to contribute, and how we're articulating that. And I think it's really important that we don't just kind of think it's for us to do, it's for the entirety of, you know, Scottish civic society and businesses to make sure that we're making the difference that we need. I'll stop there, Peter, because I could go on all morning.
Thanks, Julie. No, there is a great deal in it, and I think I would maybe pick up there's questions, there's points coming through in the chat, and thank you again to those of you who've dropped questions in there. Please feel free to put some more in, and I guess also, Julie, we'll focus on some of those cross-government issues in some of the workshops that are coming up after the break as well. Maybe go into some of those in a little bit more depth. But I think the point on intersectionality around the priority family groups, and also intersectionality in its broader sense as well, about how those overlapping and interlocking discriminations impact on families and keep them trapped in poverty, I think is really important. And I think good to hear that understanding coming through in the Child Poverty Delivery Plan. One thing that struck me, and I'll maybe put this to other to John Morag and Bruce as well, is something that's coming through in the questions is around perhaps the division is too strong a word, but the difference between employability and employerability, I think, Morag, is definitely going to be a word we're going to be hearing more of, I think now, and the quality of jobs, and how we get that balance right. And I wonder maybe if any of our panelists have reflections on that, about how we do more, how we perhaps encourage employers more, if there's any good examples of where we've brought employers into some of these discussions, because it's something that clearly a lot of people on the call are focused on. The employability is all well and good, but there needs to be decent jobs. And I think the other thing that's been picked up there is around childcare and the importance of childcare. And obviously we've got a workshop on that coming up, but just any reflections on that duality, if you like, between employability and the actual jobs that are there for people. John, I see you've got your mic on.
Yes, no, I suppose I was really pleased to see that that line of questions and comments in response to Morag's piece, because I think it is really important, and I think we do sometimes over focus on employability and how we need to support individual parents and to develop their skills or overcome the barriers that are there to either entering decent quality work or actually be able to hold on to their jobs or increase their earnings. Whereas in fact, if we're serious about meeting the 2030 target, this will require a far more fundamental kind of shift in the kind of economy that we have and the kind of labour market that exists in Scotland and the approach that employers take. So getting that focus on what how we transform the economy and how we support, encourage and ensure that employers are creating the kinds of jobs that allow parents to balance the important job of bringing up children with their aspirations to work and to increase their earnings in the workplace. And I think that's maybe where I suppose it's something be useful to hear from Julie in terms of how can we get, because there's a bit of government that's dealing with economic transformation, and there's a board and an advisory group supporting the government with that. And yes, child poverty, we've got to a position where child poverty is now a national ambition for government, which is fantastic, right at the top of the list of priorities. It's how we now ensure that work that's going on in government on economic transformation really does have, is really, child poverty really is in there as a lens, and everything has been tested against, well, how will this contribute to achieving those child poverty targets? And I suppose just how we make sure that happens. In terms of ideas around how we can do more on that, again, the delivery plan makes reference to use of public procurement. It makes reference to public sector wage setting. I think there's more detail needed there in terms of, and perhaps more in terms of targets, and really thinking what can be achieved by ensuring that when public sector agencies are procuring, that they're building into that, as far as is possible, expectations around decent quality work from those supplying huge, millions and billions of pounds of services to government. And I suppose just every bit of, wherever government, local, national or other public bodies are spending money or supporting businesses, that we build into an expectation and a requirement around that employers are providing the kind of jobs and providing the flexibility and providing the support to ensure that parents, and particularly mums, are able to get into work and stay in work. In terms of opportunities, I wonder, I think there are areas where recruitment is difficult in the economy at the moment. So does that create an opportunity to actually engage with employers and say, well, look, you're struggling to find people to work. We know there's all these parents who want to work or want to increase their hours or want to just stay in the jobs, but are having to give up their job just now because of the impossibility of juggling childcare and work. And actually, does that create an opportunity for a much more a constructive conversation about what employers can do that will meet their needs, but will also actually have an impact in terms of increasing parental employment and contributing to tackling child poverty.
Thanks, John. I'd ask if Morag or Bruce wants to come in, but I think we're definitely seeing a response to a lot of the comments already around employment. And just to say to colleagues on the call, we'll obviously save all the comments as well, and we've been talking a lot to different parts of Scottish Government. We'll make sure that these comments and reflections are fed back to Scottish Government as well, and where Scottish Government colleagues are on the call, then to make connections as well directly with people. But Morag, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, again, it's back to this employability, and it's a very deficit-based approach where we think that we need to pour some good skills into people that don't have them so they can go and find a good job, which doesn't exist. So, for example, John and I worked together for years on the early warning system, whereas John will say I followed 13 families over 7 years to see what changes welfare reform is having on their lives. And I remember one woman in particular did work with voluntary work that wasn't about employability, but it just happened to build her confidence. She then went to college and got some qualifications, and then she got a job where she was delighted, a job caring with a housing association and being a support worker. So you could not be more happy. If I had just left that research there, that I would have held that up as a complete success story. But when I went back in future years, her son, they discovered he had autism. He was struggling in secondary school. He needed his mum there definitely at the close of play of school. And she asked her employer, can I finish at 3:30 rather than 4:30 so I can get home and be with my son? He really does need me to be there at the school gates. And they said, no, we need you for that hour. And so she left her job and was back, in her eyes, back to square one without employment. And I thought it was absurd that 1 hour was making such a difference to her employer that they couldn't let her off an hour early and shift the work patterns around. So that's the type of thing we're talking about. She can do everything she is being expected to do to get and sustain a job, but at the end of the day, if the employer's not had work done with them, and this was a decent employer, a housing association, if they're not getting the work done at that point about their employability, to reuse a phrase that seems to have tickled people, then it's not going to succeed. It needs to be a much broader, more approach that takes into account. And I notice Philip put Inclusion Scotland's work that they've done to make employers more disability friendly. So that's good. There's obviously some good work out there. What I would also just say is we used to be better at this. 15, 20 years ago, when child tax credits came in and employers would work with mums to get 16 hours a week because that would reach your tax credits, and they would work with mums to get that within the school hours, you know. It used to work better. We used to have better, we had wraparound nursery back then. My children in their 20s got wraparound nursery care in the early noughties. So we have done this before, and we can do this again. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Morag. Bruce, yeah.
Yeah, I think others have covered this really well. I would just add, I think, the important stuff that's happening in the chat, some of those comments around the recognition of unpaid work, and from a rights perspective, the obligation on the government to properly support families, and seeing that as a really important aspect of this, and that accessing paid work is really important, but also the recognition of the societal value of unpaid work and caring, and the role of parents. And so I think this is a really important part of it as well. And the great work that's been done by Inclusion Scotland and Glasgow Disability Alliance and others around disabled parents, but also parents of disabled children and carers, and I think is absolutely essential. The other bit of it that I think is really important is that the experience of children who experience poverty in education and their employment and employment opportunities. This is one of the things that a lot of children and young people talk to me about, particularly if they're in some of those priority groups that we talked about, the kind of the lack of aspiration that sometimes the education system has for them, and the what we could do more to get employers engaged with schools and the education system, and kind of building some of those early career opportunities for young people coming out of education, and those transition points of young people kind of moving into paid work. I think there's a lot more that we could do with employers and with the education system and the review of education in terms of making sure that children who are experiencing poverty are actually getting those opportunities to go on to further and higher education or into paid work. And there's a real difference that's happening at the moment within the education system about the opportunities that we're providing for children who are experiencing poverty and for other children.
Thanks, Bruce. I think we've talked a lot about employment and the role of work, and I think it's really good to see numerous comments in the chat around the role of care work and caring in general, and the link to voluntary work as well. And I think it's important that we always keep that alive in our minds, that not this duality between being in work and not being in work. There is a much broader spectrum than that, and I think the aspirations around flexibility and that holistic approach to supporting parents needs to reflect that continuum of experiences. I want to go to try and cover, I know we've only got 5 minutes or so, but to try to cover maybe some of the reflections on some of the specifics in the plan around the pathfinders. And there was a question about rurality in the pathfinders, and I know we're early doors with the development of the pathfinders in Glasgow and Dundee. But maybe Julie, if you could say just a little bit around what the next steps around that might be, or what the ambitions around that might be. And also, again, I guess we've had a lot of discussion about participation and lived experience and involvement in the plan, the work that many organisations involved in this discussion today. I'm looking just at Glasgow Disability Alliance and the work that they've done to raise the voices of disabled people and make sure that that's heard in policy making processes. Our own work around Get Heard and our attempts to develop new processes around dialogue around many of the issues in the plan. I think that's really important, but maybe some reflections from any of the panelists on how we sharpen that practice in the future. But Julie, I'll go to you first.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Peter. And in terms of the pathfinders, it is early doors, but I would say the ambition is there to look at more rural communities. We have to start somewhere, and Glasgow and Dundee give us, a very interesting demographic, age-wise, but also kind of socioeconomic-wise. But actually, what is coming out really clearly is that every community is different, and therefore we need to adapt and think about how we work with local authorities to deliver differently in their areas. Local authorities know their communities better than anyone. So how do we harness that knowledge and use it? So I would hope that and anticipate that we will be looking at other pathfinders during the course of the plan. And obviously, we need to look at the kind of whole breadth of Scotland. Scotland is not just about urban areas. It says a girl from an island. It's really important that we do not forget that there are communities across Scotland who are kind of in poverty. And before I kind of pause there, I suppose there's something for me around Morag's excellent phrase of employability. I can hardly say that. I'm going to have to say that a couple of times to get it flowing. But I think there's something for me around what my job is in government. My job in government is to make sure that at the heart and centre of every policy decision that we are considering the impact on children, we are considering the impact on poverty and what is going to help to enable ministers to balance decisions, to make sure that we are investing kind of the money that we have as government to best impact. And one of the really interesting things is that COVID has taught us that we can be more flexible in terms of delivery. We can be more flexible about how we work around childcare, around children. And I certainly found that myself. You had to work in a different way, and we shouldn't go back to what was before because it's easy. We should think about what can be done to build on that. And finally, before I kind of hand back to you, Peter, one of the really interesting things that came across for me around engagement with businesses was a challenge that some of the big six gave us, is that they simply didn't understand how they could contribute, what their role was. So there's something for us to make sure that we're really, really clear with employers as to what kind of different groups need, how they can best use a ready swathe of parents who want to go into work but need to balance travel and childcare. And if I think about my own circumstances, if my children had no childcare and no transport, I would struggle to get into Edinburgh for 10:30 because of where I live to do my job, and I would have to leave at probably 1:30 to get back in time. So that's really, it reminds me how important it is around the integration and the flexibility for every household to make sure that we've got that right. And then finally, there's lots of kind of stuff in the chat around employability and kind of what we have and haven't considered. And I would go back to the statement I said at the beginning. This is not the end, this is the beginning. So continue to ask us the questions, continue to challenge us, continue to think about how we can deliver differently. We need to be realistic as government around what is possible within the financial envelope that we have, but we need to innovate and do things differently. So please support us to do that.
Thanks very much, Julie. I'm really conscious that I've allowed us to run over time, but I want to ask Bruce Morag and John, just for any final reflections on any of the comments that you've seen posted so far, if there's anything else that you would like to come in on. Really conscious I want to give folks a chance to have a cup of tea or coffee before we move into our workshop sessions. But if there are any final reflections on the plan and your hopes for it, then please, now's your time. So I don't know, Bruce, if you want to come in first.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I found this all incredibly fascinating, and I think that the conversation in the chat speaks to a need for much more discussion around this, and linking back to Julie's great introduction earlier about the fact this is a living document, and I think involving the voice of children and young people is probably my key thing in terms of this needs to be their plan, it needs to be a living plan, and that means involving them throughout the process in terms of monitoring and things as well, because so much of the solution will also come from them as well. And we've learned a lot, particularly over the last couple of years in terms of COVID, and where children have not felt properly involved in decision making, and that's led us to make really poor decisions in many ways. So I think that's my closing comment is I think the plan's really good. There's lots of positive stuff in it. There's a strong recognition that more needs to be done, but that participation of children and young people is probably my key point to leave it on.
Great, thanks very much, Bruce. Morag.
Just that some of the comments in the chat, I just want to say that we haven't been able to pick up on these today, but we understand and we're aware that these are really key issues to do with education, rurality, and all of those things. And it's a shame we can't pick up on those now because they're really important. But what I would say about the plan kind of echoes Bruce a bit, that implementation is now key. There were actions in the last delivery plan, such as the Parental Employability Fund, that did not have the opportunity to deliver the potential because of slow pace of implementation. Now, COVID happened in the middle of that, so that's perhaps understandable, but we need to keep a focus on pace and scale and make sure that these deliver what they can deliver, because there's some good things in there. They have to be actioned and delivered to make sure that we are making a difference to people.
Thanks, Morag. And John.
Yeah, maybe just pick up on one of the points that was made that that Bruce touched on as well, around food in schools and food insecurity, and also to kind of make the link there between that and the importance of implementation. So it's great in Scotland we've had the rollout of universal free school meals, which to primary 1 to 5. There was actually a promise to deliver for primary 6 and 7, and a commitment to deliver from August this year. So that all primary school children would be getting a healthy school lunch. Now that has been pushed back, and we don't have a date for that. So it's just, that's kind of warning bell. We're picking up, Bruce is picking up from his evidence, or picking up from others that, that this is a really important way in which we can support families with cost of living, with children's well-being, by ensuring they're having, all of them are having access to a healthy meal during the school day. Let's crack on and deliver on that commitment to free school meals for all primary school children, and let's learn that we can't afford to push back or retreat from commitments that are made. Families aren't in a position, this is really important support for families, and we need to follow through on the promises and commitments that have been made.
Thanks very much, John. And again, it was really difficult to try and cram in all of the comments that we got in the chat. I had a direct message asking, would we be able to save the chat? I understand that we can save the chat, and we'll make sure that we do. We'll produce a short written report from the webinar today, so we'll make sure that we cover that in the discussion in that report. Thanks to our 4 panelists this morning, to Julie, Bruce, Morag and John. Really done a great job, I think, in really bringing together our thoughts and retaining, I think, our optimism and our ambition around this plan, which I think is going to be really important and necessary over the coming months and years as we face some difficult times. I think I'm going to say now we're going to stop for going to pause, I should say, for a 10-minute break. So don't switch off the call, or if you do, you'll need to dial in again. But if you just, this is to all of our participants, so if you just hold on, we'll come back together at 11:35. So we'll then be running 5 minutes behind schedule, and you'll be magically put into your discussion groups at the flick of a switch somehow. So you'll have been assigned your workshop on the basis of the group that you desired when you registered, and we'll put you into those workshops, and then we'll have an hour for those workshops and then come back together at the very end. So thank you again all for your contributions this morning. Thanks to everyone for contributing to the chat. We'll see you again in 10 minutes. Thanks very much. Hi everyone, welcome back to the webinar. What we're going to do now is move into our workshops. Each of the workshops, you'll have been ascribed to each of the workshops when you registered. So we have one on childcare, one on employability, and one on social security. What's going to happen now is I'm going to move you over to those workshops, and you should be put straight into the one that you selected. And there'll be two speakers in there who will lead off in the discussion and a facilitator from the Poverty Alliance to help guide the discussion. And then we'll come back here together again at 12:30 just for a final review of what we've heard this morning, and just outlines where we go next in this discussion around the Child Poverty Delivery Plan. So we'll just put you into your breakout rooms now.
To record. Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll just get started now. So welcome everybody to this breakout session on making employability work for priority group families. My name's Gail Irvin and I work at Poverty Alliance. I'm the Living Wage Scotland manager. I'm really pleased to facilitate this session. We've got two excellent speakers who are going to give us a little bit more context and food for thought. We have Jack Evans, Senior Policy Advisor from JRF in Scotland, and Laura Miller, who is Strategic Manager at Fife Gingerbread. I'll let them say a little bit more about themselves if they want to and about their organisations when they kick off. But how we're going to run this session is they will speak for about 5-10 minutes, and I think you're going to have a bit of a back and forth between you to keep things interesting, Jack and Laura, so I'll just leave that up to you how you want to run that order. We'll then have time, plenty of time, at least half an hour for a bit of Q&A and discussion. I might ask a couple of questions to kick us off, but of course, if you want to ask a question, there's been quite a lot of listening in the first half, so hopefully you've stored up plenty of things to talk about. We can ask questions a few ways, either raise your hand, actually raise your hand or use the raise hand function, or you can also put it in the chat if you like as well, and we can come back to some of those. Please do turn your camera on if you're able to, particularly when you're asking questions, so people can see who you are and see what your organisation is as well. That's helpful. Right, before we go, without much more ado, I will kick on. I have been asked to do a bit of a feedback at the end of the session, so I'm going to try and take a brief note and think of some key takeaways. I'll just pass on now to Jack. I think you're going to go first, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. Thanks for having us. So before I kick off, just to say, I've got like this weird trapped nerve in my neck. So if I look like I'm in pain, it's not because of anyone's questions or comments or my general feeling about the delivery plan. It is because I'm in actual pain. So if I also turn off my camera and sound it so I can just scream into the pillow next to me. But as Gail said, my name is Jack Evans. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor at JRF in Scotland. I used to work at the Poverty Alliance. My focus is generally on work in the labour market. So this kind of employability section of the report was pretty, I found it very interesting. I thought it was a good bit of report writing. And I think the context that it came in was really important. I think the day before this report got launched, we had the Chancellor's Spring Statement, which just felt like horribly depressing. It left no support for those out of work, and it was just quite hard to see. So when you get this from the Scottish Government, you kind of go, good, well, at least someone kind of gets it. And I think that's a theme throughout the whole report. Good amount of diagnosis. The diagnosis is often correct. Where we would challenge at JRF, and I think probably others on this call, would be some of the prescription. Don't think we quite got there in the detail yet, and I think that's what the ask was in the last session, that we continue working together to get that prescription right, specifically for priority group families in employability. But anyway, the kind of the trend of increasing child poverty has been halted by Scottish Government, largely due to social security and creation of the new Scottish Child Payment. But this plan acknowledges that for progress to continue, earnings from employment must start to shoulder more responsibility in lifting families out of poverty, especially if we're getting to those 2030 targets. And to achieve this, the plan tries to outline an expanded vision of employability and the need for a transformed economy, which are the two sides of the same coin, but we're going to talk about employability. So I'd say since the evolution of employment support in Scotland, since about 2017, when we kind of got the powers, has been a journey to a more compassionate, person-centred approach via the no one left behind strategy. It's a person-centred system that's meant to be more reflexive and responsive to a changing labour market, and which tackles inequalities and grows the economy. And the principles underpinning that approach up till now have been the right ones. They've included simplicity, flexibility, dignity, continuous improvement, and evidence-based decision-making. But despite all this, there remains a clear pattern of parents being locked out of the market or labour market, or if they are in the labour market, too often it's poorly paid, inflexible, and insecure. And we've highlighted previously, and JRF in certain reports, that it's different for each priority group. The plan's headline figures are impressive when compared to previous achievements in this kind of space. The goal of reaching 50,000 parents over the lifetime of this plan is much higher than what's been achieved previously with programs like Fair Start. And the aim to move 12,000 parents into work and support 3,000 parents while into work are again quite impressive. But they would represent and must represent a big change in the way that these services are delivered and how they should be offered to parents. And what kind of support is delivered needs to listen to parents and what parents have been saying in these kind of spaces for some time. So a new approach is needed, and this plan kind of hints towards that. But there's much to do to make that a reality for families, and Laura's going to talk about that for priority families and parents, and then I'll pick up for some of the other ones.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, everyone. As Gail said, I'm Laura. I'm the Strategic Manager at Fife Gingerbread. So thank you for having me here today. We're a children and families charity in Fife. So we deliver early years family support, and we have some employability work that we do as well. And similar to what Jack was saying, we were really pleased to see increased focus on parental employment in this iteration of the delivery plan. I think that there's lots of work that happens around material deprivation and immediate crisis, but actually the long-term solution is good, well-paid, healthy, flexible, sustainable work. It has to be all those things. It cannot just be work. That's what I was kind of going to focus on today. Is what I was going to share was just a little bit about a project that we deliver in Fife called Making It Work for Lone Parents. And rather than talk about kind of what we deliver in a lot of detail, what I was just going to share was kind of the key pillars of the success of that project that I think could be transferred in other areas. I think it can be used with other priority groups as well, and bearing in mind that lone parents are often in more than one of the groups, as was talked about earlier. So the first pillar of the work that makes it successful is that it's specialist. I think that there is room for universal provision when we're dealing with child poverty. However, I think that what a specialist project allows you to do is create a project that doesn't just respond to delivering a service, but can also start to unpack and understand the structural and systemic issues that are holding families in place and holding kids in poverty, because you can begin to unpick and to understand that. And I think the other difference that we find with delivering a specialist lone parent employability service is that we're not tailoring the provision within the parameters of employability. So a lot of universal provision says we'll meet the needs of any individual, we'll tailor it to meet anyone's barriers that they're facing, but that tailoring happens within that employability bubble. And by flipping that and working with lone parents as a group, not just the employability bit, we're able to work with all the barriers, needs and issues that they're working with. And I think that you can open the doors of a service to anyone, but it doesn't mean that anyone will feel able to take part in that. So a specialist project provides a really safe space for lone parents to access it, and it can lead to more long-term permanent change rather than just that short-term service delivery approach, and create equity for those priority groups. So the specialist approach is a key pillar. The next pillar that's really important is measurement. So in employability, we are obsessed with counting job outputs and registrations and numbers. And a lot of organisations are quite targeted. So we have never targeted staff at Fife Gingerbread. We work towards what are the goals for the lone parents. But what I would highlight is we're still very successful. We've supported over 1,200 lone parents, and nearly 400 of them have achieved positive outcomes. So the need to target to achieve outputs is completely misplaced from our view. And I think that the issue with that targeting is it creates a culture where you're looking at that any job culture rather than looking at that long-term career of the family. And my view when I was reading this plan was that rather than counting job outputs, we should start to measure flow. Do you know how many families are moving in and out of poverty as a result of their interventions? And that's a real measure of the impact of our work. How many of those jobs lifted families above that poverty line? So measurement's really important, and then that removes all that pressure to work with people for 6 months. We've had a mum who moved into work at the end of last year. She's been with us 4 years, and that's sustainable, and that's really, really meaningful work for that parent and for her children. So specialist approach, measurement. The next pillar is that it's a whole family approach. I think that if you're designing interventions that are about parental employment, then simply looking at that as let's get parents jobs is too siloed, I guess, in the way of thinking it. We need to design services that are meeting the needs of the whole family and the whole household, especially for lone parents. You know, they've got that difficult juggling act. They're the main breadwinner for the household, but they're also the sole carer for their kids. So actually trying to separate that out and just look at parental employment is not going to create that long-term sustainable change. So we do all the typical employability stuff of CVs and work benefit calculations, but what we do is flip the service during school holidays, and we do loads of groups and family learning with the kids and the parents involved in it. Or we do Zoom coffee evenings at 8 o'clock to deliver confidence building groups because the kids are in bed, so parents can actually engage with it then. So a whole family approach is really important to us and part of the success. Partnership working, and not just like partnership working of I'm going to signpost to there or I'm going to claim to work in partnership because we've once done one little tiny piece of work together. What I mean is collaboration. We are joint funded, so Fife Gingerbread and Citizens Advice actually have dedicated staff funded together to deliver the project. And then where we see needs, we approach it as co-delivery. So for example, we had a lot of parents who their children had additional support needs, diagnosed or undiagnosed, and that's an enormous barrier to their progression. So we co-designed and co-delivered a group with Enable to help parents understand that and to overcome that barrier, and then that creates a peer support group for the parents to continue their journey in that. But it's not, I think partnership's a word that I see bandied around about a lot. And then the final pillar that is co-production. And by co-production, I do not mean you said we did approach of, you said you're isolated, so we did a walk and talk session, or you said you're struggling with money every month, so we did a budgeting session. That's easy. That's a lot of scoosh to say parents said this and we delivered this. By co-production, I mean putting in an incredible amount of time, resource, effort into actually removing the power imbalance between practitioners and families, and actually collaborating and co-designing the solutions. And that's where we'll find the transformational change and the real ideas of what we can take forward. So some examples of how we're doing that is we've got a parents forum who are an advisory group to our board at Fife Gingerbread. we're a membership organisation for the parents that we work with. About a third at least of our volunteers actually have lived experience. We're bringing that into the organisation really actively, and that informs the work that we're doing. So for me, it's about moving beyond consultation. We've done a survey, so that ticks a box that we've co-produced the solutions that we're putting in place there. So I kind of blathered there, but hopefully that makes sense. I think just the 5 pillars, a specialist approach, how we measure it's important, the fact it's a whole family approach, the partnership being true collaboration and co-production. And I think that that's what's made the project we're delivering really successful for the lone parents we're working with. And I think they're transferable as well to other projects and other delivery groups. So I'll hand back to Jack.
Thank you. So I think to try, I won't speak for too much longer because I guess we need to get into the discussion part, but that kind of work is exactly what Scottish Government in this plan. They've got test pilots and all this kind of stuff that they say they're going to learn to then support lone parents. A lot of it's already happening, and the parents that we work with are kind of get frustrated with us for carrying on asking what would help you in work, because the same things come up over and over again. And one theme that comes up quite a lot is that almost this isn't employability that we're talking about, because employability, I don't know, some people talk about employability as getting people ready for the workforce. These parents think it's about getting the workforce ready for them. Like, these are incredibly skilled, lots of them highly qualified, lots of people ready to go, and plenty aren't able to work, but those that can work are finding it when they enter the labour market, there's just barrier after barrier that is faced. We spoke to a lone parent in North Ayrshire who was a qualified accountant but hadn't worked as an accountant for 4 years, instead of taking work as a cleaner, because a cleaner was a much more flexible job than being an accountant. Through the support of some of the practitioners working on the Parental Employment Support Fund, they were able to give upfront childcare costs and some other bits of support that meant that that person could transition into this new job, work less hours and be paid more. And it's those kind of like surgical like inputs like the local practitioners can make that will make a massive difference, rather than relying on kind of big broad services like so sometimes we get. But I suppose the last thing I would also just want to talk about is just the good parts of the plan, and that I think that the plan, and the Cabinet Secretary has spoken a few times about the increased funding up to about £83 million for this year, and that concept of wraparound support is something that parents always kind of have talked to us about. That often the employability service themselves isn't the great thing, it's the bits that are added onto it. Like when you go to the service to help write your CV, which they don't need, they also get transport costs and childcare costs. So why don't we just make that the service? So that is that parental transition fund that's been talked about in the plan, for £15 million a year. But from my understanding, it's still quite shapeless. We're not sure where it's going. So I think if people have ideas about that, it's something that definitely should go and speak to government about, if possible. But yeah, I think the final thing is it's just, we feel quite far away now from a conversation we were having pre-pandemic about how to make work feel worthwhile and like impactful and feel good about your job. Like, I think now we're talking about making sure that people are out of poverty. I think the context has changed significantly, but we must guard against forgetting that fair work aspect, making good jobs good for people and make them work. But yeah, that's all for me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jack and Laura. I'm sorry, Jack, you put your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I accidentally shared a file, an image. I don't know if you've seen that in the chat.
Yes.
So I was going to share it anyway, but with the context of don't tweet it out or anything like that, I think it just helps kind of understand when we're talking about the different priority groups, it kind of shows you the different experience that people are having. Because the bars at the bottom show like the income decile. So that bottom bar, which is really big, say for lone parents, that means that they're in the bottom quintile of all earners going up to the top. And then the chart, the kind of percentages at the bottom are what people are in work. So you'll see that some priority groups are actually very close to the same employment level as people who aren't in poverty, but it's the experience that happens once you get into work. So the support around that needs to reflect that data. Sorry, Gail.
That's okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm not going to talk too long about my reflections on what you said, but thank you so much for that extra context. I think, given we've had a lot of talking at the people who've come along today, I'm just wanting to open up and see who has got a question already in mind that they wanted to ask about. I know in the last session, Julie was saying we could dig into any of the policies in the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan and talk about them all day, and we'd probably still have more we want to try and bottom out and discuss. So we've got a bit of time to just do that at employability level just now. So I've gone into gallery view and I'm just seeing if anyone has a raised hand. If you do have a raised hand and I can't see you for any reason, please do make me aware. But I think Michelle, if we can come to you first of all, and please do be as succinct as you can with your questions so we can try and get around the room a bit. Michelle.
No problem. Can you hear me there? I'm wearing some new headset I've not used before. I've got a very quick question for Laura. I think what you're doing sounds amazing and exactly what we try to do. And I think a lot of certain third sector organisations do as well. My question for you is, how on earth did you get funding for that? Because we find that we have the idea, we have the same ideas and same thoughts of that. You go to the funding and you have people saying, well, how many people did you get into work? And that's all they want to know back in terms of the funding. So yeah, how did you manage that?
So Making It Work Loan Payments was originally Big Lottery funded. So it was funded in other areas, North Lanarkshire, Edinburgh, I think Edinburgh, Glasgow, can't remember the fifth. But yeah, and then we have actually worked really hard to continue that as part of the
is still reserved to Westminster. That doesn't limit the Scottish Government's powers for policies that improve the quality of employment. We spend a lot of time focusing on good employers, and I think we need to start looking at the ones that are not delivering the quality work experience that we need. Then things that aren't in the plan that I think we would be remiss to mention. One, firstly, the issue of debt. You know, people are already up to their eyes in debt. Half of the people we see coming to food banks are in debt to the Department of Work and Pensions because of problems with how their benefits have been distributed. We've seen the horrifying but important report from Aberlour today detailing the £1 million of debt that families across Scotland owe for school meals. There has to be a problem if we're increasing social security and it's going straight back into the hands of debtors, particularly if those debtors are the ones that provide social security, whether that's the DWP or the Scottish Government. The 5-week wait has always been a significant driver at the start of a universal credit claim for food bank use. Welcome to see the action committed to around the benefit cap in this plan, but we also need to look at this built-in wait at the start of universal credit. And last but absolutely not least is the risk and challenge that the cost of living crisis presents us. While we've seen action from the UK Chancellor last week in terms of getting more money into people's pockets to help with primarily with the cost of energy, what's on offer doesn't even cover the cost of that energy hike, and the prices of everything else are increasing as well. And I think really threaten to push new groups of people at risk of using food banks, at risk of food insecurity, lower paid workers in particular. So I guess in conclusion, the plan's called Bright Start, Best Futures. I would say it's a solid start and an uncertain future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Polly and Chester there for our inputs. I would like to kind of open up the discussion, so if I could ask if people are comfortable to turn their cameras on, just so we can kind of see each other and have some more interaction that way. But I guess if we could just open up with some initial thoughts and reactions from the room to the points raised by Polly and Chester there. Did we agree with the challenges they set out? Is there more challenges we need to be adding to that list? wants to kick us off?
I'll kick off if you don't mind, Fiona. John Dalton here speaking, East Ayrshire. I think the key thing for me that I've taken out of this morning, it was always used to be the case that employability is the key factor into to getting out of employment, but it's become increasingly clear that's no longer the case, and it has to be quality employment. I did notice that in the chat earlier on, there was a range of comments about the various vacancies. I know that, for example, ourselves in East Ayrshire have got major vacancies in dealing with and attracting carers. We know the NHS have got problems bringing in staff and things in that as well. So I think amongst the main public sector bodies, I think we need to have a real review to employability. There certainly will be people who are more than capable of doing those jobs, but the terms and conditions aren't suitable. For example, a lot of carers are only they're part-time, basically, and fitted into that, and that causes a whole load of problems with regards to the social security system. And I think that within the social security remit within Scotland, we should have a greater emphasis on carers and what we can do. Now, they have come in and they did, one of the first things they did was increase the carers payments up in line to people on JSA, but for a lot of the work that carers do is massive in helping people, whether is due to disability, mental, physical, whatever the circumstances, and actually saves the country an awful lot of money in terms of the services that are getting put in. And I think we could hit a win-win situation if we put put more emphasis into being able to assist carers in finding the correct balance where we can give carers the satisfaction which obviously they get, the financial rewards that they require, and that through the vital roles which they do in society.
Thank you very much. Any other kind of opening thoughts from the room? Oh.
Right, have I unmuted at last? Right. And apologies, I've got workmen in the flat, so that I could be interrupted by loud mechanical noises, and if it is, I'll just stop. I've been concerned about the apparent lack of emphasis on social security, and that might sound a strange statement. I think we have to understand that all the Scottish Government can do within the Scottish social security system is to offer supplements to a benefit system that's not substantially under Scottish control. Now, that's particularly important for people with disabilities, but it's true more generally. And what we've done so far has been very often to incorporate a number of features from the UK system, which have proved in practice to be obstacles to giving people a decent income package. I point particularly here to the disability benefits, where they've duplicated a structure where we know from previous research that, first of all, large numbers of people with disabilities either don't recognize their situation in relation to the benefits which are available, or fail to claim because they don't understand what the purpose of the benefit is for. This was particularly true in some research that was done on DLA before PIP, which said more or less, that people couldn't really make sense of the criteria. So lots of people who were on ESA were having a crack at it and failing to get the benefit, whereas a lot of the people who should be claiming weren't claiming because either they don't think that they're disabled, or they don't think the benefit is for them, or they think the benefit is for something else. And there is a lot of confusion here about what the benefits are for, what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to work. Now this, I think, is an endemic problem. What I think we've got to understand is that when we're supplementing, the supplements have got to be accessible, comprehensible. And I'm afraid that often means that we've got to look at different ways of distributing. I made an argument when the disability benefits were going through that we should be thinking in terms of a mobility allowance again, simply because people have got a rough idea what a mobility allowance is for. Whereas if you ask people what an attendance allowance is for, they haven't got a clue. Now, it's that sort of problem that we've got, and the take-up figures are disastrous. Now, we can try and do a little by education, but the truth of it is we've been struggling with these issues of take-up for decades without succeeding. And we have to think about different ways of basically managing to get money to people in a more automatic way. And very often, I'm afraid that means that they need to be decoupled from things like the universal credit system, which have got all of the problems that we come to associate with take-up magnified and made worse by lots of peculiarities, leading to people not getting the benefits when they need them. There's a lot more I could say, but I'll stop there. And
thank you, Paul. I'm going to come to Susan next. You've got your hand up.
Hi. Just a couple of things I just want to think about. Obviously, my name's Sue Lyons. I'm here sitting just outside Inverness. So rurality and poverty is a big deal, I think, for many of the people that I work with. And the effect of that
care. And I do think, again, play is such an important part, play, learning, all those things. And I think the school-age childcare plan that's being developed is one that we really need to make sure that we're responding to when it comes out, to ensure that these are children and young people-led activities that are going to support them for the school-age childcare.
Is that okay for me to come in as well, David? Perfect. Again, I would echo everything that Satwa had said there. On the disability point, there was an inquiry done by the UK Parliament into childcare for disabled children, and they found that 3/4 of parents of disabled children had left work because of the difficulties in accessing appropriate childcare. And you can see how that would heighten parents of disabled children's risk of poverty. So I think it's really important that we're integrating the evidence that we have on this into that strategic plan, and also thinking about how it is being utilised in the delivery of some of these commitments. I think there's also considerations to be made around the accessibility for disabled parents. There's an emphasis within the Child Poverty Delivery Plan on connectivity, and we know that women are more likely to be reliant on public transport, which is often highly inaccessible for disabled people. So how are we making sure, for example, that these services are accessible to parents who are disabled or parents who have a disabled child? Because unless you're able to actually attend these services, then there's very little use in actually offering them. On the childcare workforce point, occupational segregation is a core focus of our work because it's a key cause of the gender pay gap. And we've seen very little movement in terms of that 97% figure, and childcare remains heavily female dominated. As Satwa said, there's been some small scale initiatives to try and address that. So we have an employer accreditation program with local authorities, and some of them have put an emphasis on trying to get more men into childcare. And there have been some successes there, but Satwa is right. We have a slide when we're presenting about the undervaluation of women's work, and we call it the cycle of doom, because we see that childcare is seen as being women's work, that there's no improvement to the terms and conditions or the pay, which means that men are not entering that sector, which then means it's continued to be dominated by women, and it's then seen as women's work. So we see this systemic undervaluation of the childcare workforce, preventing men from entering that sector. And ultimately, if we're to change that figure, there needs to be an economic imperative for men to enter the childcare sector. And at the moment, we don't have that. There was some research published by the Scottish Government recently into international mechanisms to revalue women's work. And we'd really like to see some of that evidence being integrated into the strategic plan. However, when we look at the Child Poverty Delivery Plan, there's a commitment to paying the living wage to staff who are delivering the funded hours, but that doesn't go far enough. We need everyone to be paid at least the living wage within the childcare sector, regardless of the service that they are delivering. That should be across the board. And we continue to see disparity between different childcare settings in terms of the pay and the terms and conditions that's offered. And the emphasis to make sure that this is a good quality service that meets the needs of parents and children means that this has to be a high quality service. And part of that is ensuring that we value the workforce appropriately.
So can I just come in with one more point? It's more of a general point, but I've just been thinking that actually the other thing we need to be doing in any childcare strategy or developments across Scotland is stopping it being something that's for profit. You know, we've got a very mixed economy of providers at the moment, and we've got incredibly large chains that will make an enormous profit from childcare. And if we're looking at something that's going to be part of the social and economics infrastructure of the country, we need to be looking to see how we can stop people profiting from it and charging exorbitant amounts, which contribute to the situation that families find themselves in and the levels of in-work poverty that we see.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. I know on timing, I'm being told that we have a clock ticking down on our screen. We might, unless we can get that fixed, which my colleagues are working on, it might pull us out of this room back into the main room, in which we might have to join back into this breakout room. I'm very sorry if that happens. Apologies if it does. Up until that point, or beforehand, any other contributions of your own experiences, of your organisations, views on what will enable successful implementation, or questions for Ruth and Satwa? I'm very happy to sit in the silence until, here we go, from Anne Lee. Anne.
Hi, good morning. Well, good morning, just. I'm very interested in, there's been a lot of talk about kind of traditional childcare. Do we have experience, do we have insight of where childcare, perhaps not in Scotland, maybe in England, maybe elsewhere abroad, is working and working well, where it's maybe creative and innovative and we can learn lessons from? And is there an opportunity to invest in similar models in Scotland so that we just don't continue to complain? As a single parent who brought up 2 children, I understand the challenges, but rather than more that, can we really put our efforts and our heads together to learn the lessons from where it's working well and look to see how we can fund that innovation in Scotland?
Thank you, Anne.
I'm happy to speak to this.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I could just quickly say a couple of things. There have been some really good sort of testing of different ways that childcare can become more accessible and available to families. The Scottish Government had the Access to Childcare Fund, and there's been a whole series of different types of providers funded through that to look at how to make childcare more accessible for the priority family groups. So there have been specific initiatives looking at single parents, disabled children in particular, and recognising actually that whilst childcare is an enabler in terms of training, education and work, it's also something that's important in its own right for children and families to be able to access, particularly for those families with disabled children. Actually, it's fine for them not to participate in any other activity, but just have some time back, knowing that their child is in something that's appropriate and suitable. So I think it's worth looking at some of the examples from there. I'm not sure if they're going to be using that as part of their childcare plan, but it's something I would ask Scottish Government for. It was managed by Children in Scotland, so they will have information about it. The other thing is there is actually a flexible childcare service in Scotland called Flexible Childcare Services Scotland. We tested the model and the approach in One Parent Family Scotland because we were looking at how to make childcare work for those families where there's only one parent before and after school, doing the pickups, possibly having to work flexible hours, not being able to afford the upfront costs of childcare, etc., etc. So actually, it's now got, I think, 26 services or something, and we can certainly send the link to their website onto the Poverty Alliance to share with people. But you know, the model is that you book what you need 1 or 2 weeks in advance. You can still change it if your shift patterns change, and that you only pay for the hours you use. There are no deposits or upfront or hidden costs. And all those wee transitions in the day, if your child's at school and needs then after school care, are managed by the provider. It does mean that you have to be investing a bit more in terms of number of people working there, etc. So the unit cost might be more expensive than traditional childcare models, but it takes the stresses and strains and complexities out of families' lives.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now, things were just going too smoothly, weren't they? So it would appear that there was an inadvertent timer on the breakout rooms, which wasn't adjusted to reflect the changed timing of the workshop. So apologies for that. There is an option for us to immediately go back into breakouts, but I think as we've only got 10 minutes left, I know that I was in all of the breakout rooms at various points and I know the discussions were going well. My apologies for that. We weren't able to amend that once the workshops were started. So apologies for that. What I am going to do, even with your truncated discussions, is if I could go to each of the workshop hosts, each of the facilitators for the workshop, to maybe give us just the top 3 lessons coming out of those workshops, top 3 issues that were coming out of those workshops, and then we can open it up. We've still got a little bit of time. We're aiming to finish by 1 at the latest. We can certainly finish a little bit earlier, but if we could go to Gail Irving, who was facilitating the first workshop. Sorry to land this on you, Gail, but if you were able to give a bit of feedback initially, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure. So I think we covered quite a lot of ground, but in terms of key takeaways, I suppose one of the first ones that struck me was we talked a lot about the kind of support provided to people, employability support, and how a lot of the organisations obviously working on the front line with individuals do really know what works. But I suppose we were reflecting on, do the decision makers and people that hold the purse strings fully appreciate and understand that, and understand what it costs to deliver an effective employability programme? So we touched a little bit on some of the constraints that organisations still face around funding, that is very much geared towards just getting people into work, any kind of work, rather than more meaningfully looking at what are the outcomes for people, and are they getting out of poverty, and are they getting into employment that is more sustainable and better for them. So that was one. I think the second point that really struck me, I think Laura from Fife Gingerbread in our group was talking about, the long-term solution to all of this has to be good quality, well-paid, flexible work, and it has to be all of those things. And I suppose that made me reflect on all of the changes we have seen in the labour market during COVID, but we still know that so many of the issues facing people who are struggling with low-paid, insecure work, or struggling to get access to any work, the changes haven't really worked in their favour. So that made me think a lot more about the forms of flexibility, for example, that we need employers to move on to allow more people to get on and progress in work. And the third point just takes me straight to that question of employerability that we've been talking about all during the morning. And we had a few ideas about the ways that employers can be, I suppose their attention can properly be hooked, and their understanding about some of these things they could do to make their work more accessible for people with disabilities or health issues or caring responsibilities, and try and incentivise businesses to make those change and to feel part of what is needed as a whole national movement, really, to make some of these long-term structural changes for people to get on and progress in work. Those would be my 3 key takeaways.
Thanks very much, Gail. And once we've heard back from the other 2 workshops, we'll bring everyone in for just any final reflections or comments. We've not had that opportunity this morning for everyone to share those final thoughts. So if I could then go to Fiona McCarthy, who I think was facilitating the session on social security. Over to you, Fiona.
Yeah, so we had a really detailed discussion around, again, those connections between social security and employability, and what needs to kind of shift in terms of making employability and making jobs more effective for people. We also talked about access to social security in regards to take-up rates, and where we're at with take-up rates, particularly in things like, Scottish Child Payment. I think we've got rates of 70% of that, so there's more that needs to be done around that. And also, a kind of broader conversation around access to welfare rights and welfare rights support, and how we are supporting people with that, and the kind of issues around recruitment and welfare rights just now in terms of maintaining staff, and also just more broadly the kind of issues we face in terms of siloed working and policy agendas. So, first we have a focus on child poverty, and we invest in that area, then we move to a focus on that area, and those issues around kind of unsustainable funding and chasing funding and stuff are meaning we're losing a lot of expertise in terms of in-house learning, and different groups are getting left behind at different points in policy agendas. And then we also talked about those kind of cost of living issues in terms of what that means, and what we could be doing in terms of thinking about regulating Ofgem as opposed to kind of supplementing our social security system. And of course, vitally, we've also talked about reality, and I think again something that's really kind of critical in terms of our thinking in terms of social security and how we consider that in terms of our forward.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And lastly, to David Riley, who's facilitating the workshop on childcare.
Thanks, Peter. And we benefited from Satbart Raman and Ruth Boyle's contributions and provocations here, and their take on some of the risks and opportunities around the implementation of childcare. Some of those kind of key points was the really vital role that childcare has as a end in of itself, as opposed to simply as a means to an end for helping people get into work, even though it's vital in supporting the conditions for people to get into work, that childcare in itself is part of our social and economic infrastructure and a vital part of our social economic infrastructure. And to make it work best for us all, we need to drive up availability and accessibility and quality of childcare so that it's child-led, that there isn't a disability premium or other kind of forms of premium in childcare, and that it's available for, it was suggested 50 hours a week for funded childcare. And that requires a more diverse workforce within childcare, and which it in of itself requires increased and improved terms and conditions towards real living wage, real living hours, and childcare provision is being recognised as a really socially vital profession in of itself. We heard from one of our colleagues in the call about their direct experience of a disability premium in childcare, whereas standard rates of childcare may cost £10 an hour, but for children with disabilities that can increase to £50 an hour, and the incredible impact that that must have on the lives of a priority group within our national plans. And we also talked about learning, the importance of learning lessons, which is throughout this implementation plan, but also learning lessons not just from local tests of change, but also from other contexts and other countries about what's possible and what works in abroad. We've known throughout and in our work in Get Heard Scotland that voices of experience are vital for successful implementation. But it's really important for us all to be able to explore and learn more than just our own experiences, but also be able to have really high quality deliberations and engagement processes about what might be possible by us all learning together from other models, and so that we can help build a co-produced offer towards a socially good childcare system that works for society as a whole.
Thanks very much, David. I want to throw it open to those of you that are still with us, those 70 people on the call. If there are comments that you didn't feel that you had the chance to make in the discussion, or just additional issues that have come up during the course of the morning that you feel you want to get on record. As I said before, what we'll be doing with this is producing a short report from the webinar this morning, but we'll be making sure that that's fed into the various contacts that we've got with Scottish Government at the moment. So an opportunity for you, I think, for us to close out the discussion here with any final reflections or comments. And if it's certainly possible for you to put on your camera now, if there's any final comments, or to raise a hand and bring you in. I'm not seeing any hands raised or comments being flagged. So I'm not going to detain everyone much longer than they need to. I want to say, I guess, thank you to all of you for coming along this morning. I think this has been the first really public discussion of the new Child Poverty Delivery Plan. I hope for many of you this might have stimulated greater interest in what that plan contains. I'm sure many of you were already well aware, but I think there is clearly a need for more discussion around the plan and how its objectives can be implemented. And as I think Julie Humphreys and others have said throughout the morning, this is something that falls to all of us. It's not the responsibility of Scottish Government on its own, or of local authorities, of others. Particularly the third sector has a really crucial role in delivering. I think the other thing that's come through for me really clearly is that we have got some significant challenges ahead. Julie had mentioned the resource spending review that was published last week. I think that gives some really critical dimension to this Child Poverty Delivery Plan and the ability for that plan to be delivered. So I think there's something we need to do to keep on top of this plan as the months and years roll on. I think in terms of next steps for us as the Poverty Alliance, for us, we're working with different parts of Scottish Government at the moment, and particularly around that desire to see greater participation, more dialogue around key parts of this plan to make sure that people who have direct experience of poverty have the opportunity to feed in a meaningful way into the implementation of the commitments that have been made. So particularly around early learning, childcare, around adult skills, benefit take-up, as well as with a number of local authorities. We have some ongoing discussions and really positive discussions about how we can embed greater and more meaningful dialogue across Scottish Government and in particular local authorities. A crucial next step for us is to continue the engagement that we've had with Poverty Alliance members around the implementation of the Child Poverty Delivery Plan. So this is my usual sales pitch at the end of webinars, is to say if you're not a member of the Poverty Alliance, then please consider joining. We'll have another webinar for members who were involved in the Get Heard initiative last year and contributing to shaping this new Child Poverty Delivery Plan. So we'll be having that webinar at the end of this month, and looking forward to planning more of these kinds of discussions over the remainder of this year to make sure that we are focusing down on the issues that matter most to our members and feeding that back to Scottish Government. We'll also be engaging with members to understand how particularly the cost of living crisis is impacting on the work that you do, and feeding that back into Scottish Government and through the Child Poverty Programme Board, which oversees the delivery plan. We'll have the opportunity to feed directly into that work. And I think generally the Poverty Alliance's work will continue to focus on how we create fair work through things like living wage and living hours, and how we secure adequate benefits, which is a key goal for the Alliance and our members. So we'll be continuing to lobby and campaign around things like the benefit cap and the two-child limit, and looking at what more we can do to deliver change in that area, and also to ensure that benefits do keep up with the rising cost of living. We've seen some good progress in Scotland so far, but we need to maintain that progress. And I think as Julie mentioned this morning, this isn't the end of a discussion. This is very much the start of a discussion for us around the Child Poverty Delivery Plan and around the wider aspects of tackling poverty in Scotland. So thanks again for everyone for joining us this morning. I do hope that you'll be part of those discussions and campaigns and lobbying work going forward, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. And you can now go and have an early lunch. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Moon. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.